If tomorrow all the things were gone, worked on all my life, and I had to start again, just my children and my wife, I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, and the flag that stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
We're about to read from Mark's Gospel. I invite you to turn in your pew Bibles to Mark 5:21 through 43, found on page 816. Beginning last Sunday and stretching through next week, the lectionary presents us with a collection of miracle stories. This morning, as we hear a narrative of Jesus' healing, we'll explore the question, what does God have to do with health?
When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered round him, and he was by the lake. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him.
And pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians, and she had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well."
Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease."
While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, and the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping."
And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. There ends the reading.
Last Sunday, Pastor Mike asked, "How's your anxiety level?" One brave congregant responded, "Pretty high." Indeed, there is much to be anxious about these days. The climate crisis threatening the survival of our planet. The rise of Christian nationalism threatening the survival of our democratic institutions. And the cultural shift away from organized religion threatening the survival of our churches. Add to that all the stressors in our individual lives. There's no denying that anxiety and stress are taking a toll on our health, from high blood pressure to heart attacks, to substance abuse, to mental health challenges, to gun violence, to generational trauma. Despite the advances in our modern health system, this heightened state of dis-ease in our lives and our world is causing our spiritual, mental, and physical well-being to suffer. So this morning I ask, how's your health? In last week's Bible text, Jesus calmed the disciples' anxiety and fear by stilling the wind and the waves that shook their boat and their faith. Today's passage continues the story of Jesus' journey across the Sea of Galilee, where we encounter Jesus ministering to those seeking healing. Before Jesus even steps ashore, a crowd has gathered. From among those vying for his time and attention comes forward a religious leader who falls at Jesus' feet, begging him to come to his home to lay hands on his ailing daughter. As Jesus is making his way to the man's house to perform the requested act of mercy, Jesus, the multitasker, as one theologian calls him, encounters another person in need. His original mission is interrupted by a woman who has been hemorrhaging blood for 12 years. From among the crowd, the woman reaches out and touches Jesus' clothes, and she is instantly healed. Jesus stops to inquire about the identity of this woman, and it is during this delay that the synagogue leader receives the bad news that his daughter is already dead. "Never mind," the messengers say, "it's too late." But Jesus continues to the man's home anyway, and when he arrives, he goes inside, takes the girl by the hand, and says to her, "Get up." Immediately, she is restored to health. This passage from the Gospel of Mark presents Jesus' encounter with the bleeding woman and the ailing girl as one singular narrative of healing and restoration of life. What does this story tell us about Jesus and his care for us? What does it say about how we are healed and made whole? And what do we learn about our call to serve those who are suffering and in need in our lives and in our world? Jesus is presented as the giver of life for those who live in the shadow of suffering, pain, and death. His healing power is available for all who seek health and wholeness and would reach out to receive it. Yet Jesus doesn't claim credit for the healing that takes place. Jesus says to the woman, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Similarly, he instructs the religious leader, "Do not fear, only believe." These words were not just for the benefit of the girl's father or the early church, but for all of us who suffer the human condition and our need of healing and new life. The number 12 is significant in Jewish thought, so it's no coincidence that the woman has been bleeding for 12 years and the girl is 12 years old. Scholars have suggested that the repeated use of the number 12 for the age of the girl and the duration of the woman's hemorrhaging suggests that this story is ultimately a metaphor for the faith of Israel with its 12 tribes. And indeed, faith is the overarching theme in the narrative. Hemorrhaging for 12 years is a lot of blood to lose. A flow of blood for this length of time would exhaust a person. On top of that would be the feeling of isolation that comes from the cultural taboo in Jesus' time around the uncleanliness of bleeding. It's as if the bleeding is a metaphor for the woman's vitality, dignity, and connection to life that are draining away. The text says this woman had endured much under many physicians. Imagine spending 12 years pursuing relief from a medical condition, 12 years of doctor's visits, 12 years of trips to the emergency room, 12 years of hospitalizations, 12 years of insurance claims, 12 years of medical bills. And after all this, the suffering continues. And now the woman has nothing. The doctors have failed to help her. Medical treatments have proved unsuccessful. She is left with no resources, and she is at the end of her rope. There's no alternative left for this bleeding woman except to avail herself of Jesus' healing power. And so she does whatever she has to do, whatever it takes, for the sake of healing and new life. She makes one last-ditch desperate effort to live by placing her hope in Jesus. The woman says to herself, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be well." Theologian Will Willimon writes, "This is one of the strongest images of faith I know of in the New Testament. Her hand reaching out from the margins of the crowd to where she had been pushed by her poverty, her pain, her gender, reaching out to touch Jesus, the Lord, the giver of life. She reaches out and receives the life for which she had hoped." And the narrative's second incidence of healing, the father of the young girl is a person with a measure of prestige, respected in his community. Yet, while he is an important person, a religious leader, his precious child's illness has reduced him to falling to the ground in front of an itinerant preacher-healer in a last-ditch effort to prevent the worst from happening. Because this father cannot bear to lose his child, he risks it all. By going to Jesus, who is already in trouble with the authorities, the man puts himself in danger of being ridiculed, or worse. He also risks missing the last few precious moments in his daughter's life. This father's moment of faith, I believe, comes a little later, when the news arrives of his daughter's death. At this moment, he chooses to turn from fear and only believe, as Jesus calls him to do. He and Jesus continue to the house, which is in full commotion with weeping and loud wailing. The finality of death seems to define the moment until Jesus announces that all is not lost, for the girl is asleep, not dead. Jesus makes his way past the mourners and into the house, where he reaches down to invite the little girl to rise up and live. Immediately, the girl is restored to life. Jesus then reminds the family that she might be hungry after her ordeal, and he tells them to feed her. He misses neither the big, dramatic opportunities for healing nor the most ordinary details of compassion. Theologian Friedrich Buchner has written a beautiful sermon on today's text in which he puts us in the place of the little girl as Jesus speaks to us, taking our hand and telling us to rise up and live. Buchner writes, "You who believe, and you who sometimes believe and sometimes don't believe much of anything, and you who would give almost anything to believe if only you could. Get up," he says, all of you, all of you. Jesus gives life not only to the dead, but to those of us who are the only partly alive, who much of the time live with our lives closed to the beauty and miracle of every day we live. That, Buchner says, is the power at the heart of this story and all our stories. The power of new life, new hope, and new being. Both stories of healing in today's text involve women in crisis, daughters of Abraham, who are subject to the taboos of their time and culture. There were those in Jesus' day who believed that bleeding women and dead girls should be avoided at the risk of conveying their uncleanliness to others. Yet Jesus refuses to keep himself removed from those who are in need, even if they have been deemed unclean. He chooses to respond to the pain and suffering of the woman and girl with healing presence and compassionate touch. In Jesus' encounter with the bleeding woman, he sensed the healing that had just taken place, and he could not simply walk away. For him, the most important thing in that moment is to encounter the person who has touched him and acknowledge her as a human being and not just an anonymous recipient of his healing power. Jesus turns to the crowd of people, asking, "Who touched my clothes?" Williman writes, "Perhaps this is one of the most healing moments in the whole story. This woman who was an unknown, identified only by her bleeding and her pain, is now going to be known by face, by name, in all her particularity and individuality. Tenderly, Jesus calls her daughter. It is an intimate designation that honors her, that places her within the family of God. Like this bleeding woman, we all have a deep longing to be restored and made whole. We yearn to be touched by the healing balm of God's love. Yet this text may leave us asking the painful question, why is everyone who suffers not healed? Even when they do have faith, even when they pray and believe and trust in God. I do not have an easy answer to questions such as these. But perhaps we should be focusing on a different set of questions. Questions such as, what is healing? What enables people to be well? What does God have to do with wholeness and health? Healing is not always what we imagined. In my work as a chaplain, I was often called to situations where the medical system had reached its limits. I was asked to minister to patients and their loved ones for whom the medical professionals had said, "We've tried everything possible, and now there's nothing more we can do." In these moments, healing was often experienced as the restoration of meaning in people's lives, no matter the circumstances. Meaning in relationships and the work of forgiveness and reconciliation. Meaning in the contributions we have made to a cause or effort larger than ourselves. Meaning in the deep truth that in spite of our failings and shortcomings, we are God's beloved, and there is nothing, not even death, that can separate us from the love of God. In these situations, healing and wholeness are found in our connection to self, God, and others. The biblical concepts of justice, shalom, salvation, and loving one's neighbor are essential to our understanding of health. The Hebrew term shalom is considered most closely related to the term health in the Bible. It incorporates peace, prosperity, rest, safety, security, justice, happiness, health, welfare, and wholeness. The concept of shalom is connected to the New Testament concept of salvation. God's salvation is directed at the whole world. The story of the Bible can be viewed as the story of God's efforts to bring healing and restore wholeness to the entire cosmos. The biblical understanding of health involves supporting the health of the entire community. Healthy living involves being in right relationship with God, self, others, and the environment, and acting for justice for all God's children. Illness in biblical times, and today as well, removes individuals from full participation in their communities. In the New Testament, Jesus' acts of healing restored individuals to communal life. The United Church of Christ's resolution reclaiming the church's role in health and healing defines health as harmony with self, others, the environment, and with God, a continuum of physical, social, psychological, and spiritual well-being. And the Christian Medical Commission of the World Council of Churches says health is a dynamic state of well-being of the individual and society, of physical, mental, spiritual, economic, political, and social well-being, of being in harmony with each other and with the material environment and with God. These understandings of health challenge us to consider our priorities and how we will choose to respond to the suffering of individuals and the needs of our world. Within the wider culture, there is growing interest in spirituality, wellness, and health. Jesus calls us to a ministry that cares for the sick and marginalized and promotes well-being for all. How can we reclaim the church's role in promoting health and well-being? What ministries must we be engaged in? How will we prioritize our time, finances, and resources in support of ministries of healing and health? At MBCC, we are already doing many things to support health and well-being. We provide meaningful worship experiences, a sense of connectedness and community, and service to those in need in the community, all of which have a positive impact on health. New ministries of care and healing at MBCC might include coordinating care for those who are homebound and hospitalized by expanding our existing ministries of prayer and visitation, developing new spiritual growth opportunities, such as small groups ministry and spiritual offerings for the community, including yoga, meditation, and sound bath experiences, growing community educational programs that promote health and healing, such as parenting classes and caregiver support groups, increasing our service and advocacy efforts with vulnerable groups, including the unhoused and those experiencing food insecurity. To be successful and sustainable, our ministries of health will need to be integrated into all aspects of church life: worship, education, outreach, and service. And they will need the support and involvement of all of us. For those of you looking for meaningful ways to get involved at MBCC, now's your chance to join this exciting new initiative. The prophet Isaiah gives us a powerful vision and compelling blueprint to inspire and guide us as we create new ministries of care and healing at MBCC. In Isaiah 58, 6-12, the prophet rebukes the hypocrites in Zion as he calls them to a new way of life. He contrasts their traditional observance of fast days with the kind of fast God chooses, practicing justice, mercy, and compassion as the path that leads to restoration, healing, and well-being for all God's children. Let's listen to the prophet's words. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin. Then the light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger and the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. With faith in God, the example of Jesus, and the Holy Spirit to inspire and guide us, please join me in the work of creating ministries of healing and health that offer shalom for all God's children. Amen.